By the time Caleb Reed realized the girl in the river was a vampire princess, he had already wrapped his hands around her silver chains, and the palace bells were already ringing for his arrest. The rain had been falling for 6 straight hours over Briar's Crossing, turning the dirt road into black mud and the river into a swollen strip of moonless glass. Caleb was not supposed to be out there. He was supposed to be in the old fairy house, counting the last of his repair money, pretending that one more broken week would not finish ruining him. At 32, he had the kind of tired face people trusted and the kind of empty pockets people ignored. He fixed lanterns, wagon axles, dock engines, whatever the border towns needed, and lately they needed less than they owed. His coat was patched at the elbows, his boots leaked, and the little room he rented above the ferry office smelled like damp wood, engine oil, and bills he could not pay. Briar's Crossing sat on the edge of the Nocturne Dominion, where human law ended at the river and vampire law began on the far bank. Everyone in town knew the rules. Do not cross after sundown. Do not answer singing from the water. Do not touch anything silver if it bears a royal crest. And above all, if the river gives you something, leave it for the night court. Caleb had heard those warnings since childhood, but warnings were easier to obey when they did not sound like someone drowning. He heard it just after midnight, beneath the thunder and the groan of the ferry cables, a sharp, breathless cry from the riverbank, then the scrape of metal against stone. At first, he told himself it was driftwood caught in the current. Then the cry came again, softer this time, almost swallowed by the rain. Caleb stepped out with a lantern in one hand and a wrench in the other, moving down the slick steps toward the water. The river was running high, slapping hard against the posts, carrying branches, foam, and broken pieces of something that looked like black lacquered wood. Then the lantern light caught a pale hand gripping a half-submerged root. A girl was in the water, her white fingers clenched so tightly her knuckles seemed carved. From marble, heavy silver chains ran from her wrists into the current, dragging her backward inch by inch. She looked no older than 20, with long dark hair plastered to her face, a torn cloak wrapped around her shoulders, and skin so pale it reflected the lantern glow like moonlight. Caleb froze when she lifted her head. Her eyes were crimson. Not sick, not painted, not human. Vampire. Every sensible part of him screamed to step back, close the door, let the Dominion handle its own nightmare. Then he saw the chain cutting into her wrists, the panic she was fighting to hide, and the way she tried to push herself between him and the dark shapes moving in the fog across the river. "Do not touch the silver," she whispered. "If you value your life, human, walk away." Caleb swallowed hard, rain running down his jaw. "I'm not great at walking away." He dropped the lantern onto the mud, grabbed the chain with both hands, and pulled. The chain was colder than anything Caleb had ever touched, colder than winter iron, colder than river stone, cold enough to bite through the skin of his palms and climb into his bones. He planted both boots in the mud and pulled until his shoulders burned, but the current fought him like a living thing. The girl in the water tried to help, bracing one bare foot against a submerged rock, yet every movement made the silver links hiss faintly in the rain. Caleb could not understand how metal could sound hurt, but it did. The fog across the river thickened, gathering between the twisted willow trees on the Dominion bank, and in that gray curtain, lanterns began to appear. Not human lanterns. These glowed deep red, steady and watchful, moving without the bob and sway of ordinary hands. The girl saw them too. Her crimson eyes widened, not with fear for herself, but with something sharper. Urgency. "Leave me," she said, her voice low but commanding, like someone used to being obeyed even while half-trapped in a river. "Those lights belong to the men who chained me. If they see you helping me, your name will be carried to the palace before dawn." Caleb grunted, wrapped the chain once around his forearm, and leaned back with everything he had. "Then let us make sure they spell it right." The silver links dragged across the rocks with a bright, scraping shriek. 1 foot, then 2. The girl rose higher out of the current, soaked cloak clinging to her shoulders, the broken crest on her chest flashing beneath the lantern light. Caleb saw it clearly now, a black rose wrapped around a crescent moon, the royal mark stamped on every treaty post along the border. His stomach sank. He had not pulled some lost noble from the river. He had grabbed hold of a political disaster wearing chains. A horn sounded from the far bank, deep and smooth, too elegant to be a warning and too cold to be music. The girl turned toward it, and the rain around her seemed to slow. "They know," she whispered. Caleb did not ask who. He pulled again, and this time something under the water gave way. The chain snapped free from whatever had anchored it below, and the force sent them both backward into the mud. Caleb landed hard beside the lantern, breath knocked from his chest, while the girl collapsed against the riverbank with the chains still locked around her wrists. For one strange second, the world held still. Rain tapped on the ferry roof. The river roared. Somewhere in the fog, men were crossing. Then the girl reached for the broken chain with trembling fingers and tried to hide how badly her hands shook. Caleb pushed himself up, grabbed his wrench, and struck the lock once, twice, 3 times. The silver did not break. It rang, and with each ring the girl flinched as though the sound traveled straight through her. Caleb stopped immediately. "Sorry," he said. The word came out rough, useless, human. She stared at him as if no one had apologized to her in a very long time. "You are apologizing to a vampire," she said. "I am apologizing to someone in pain." Her expression changed so quickly he nearly missed it. A crack in the royal mask, a glimpse of the frightened young woman beneath the cold command. Then it vanished. She lifted her chin toward the ferry house. "Do you have bolt cutters?" "Inside." "Then get them." Caleb helped her stand. She was lighter than he expected, but the air around her carried a pressure that made the lantern flame bend toward her. They moved up the steps together, Caleb keeping one hand near her elbow without gripping it, because he had a feeling this girl had spent enough of the night being held against her will. Behind them, the red lights reached the middle of the river. Shapes emerged through the fog, tall figures in dark coats, standing on a narrow black boat that made no engine noise. At the front stood a man with white hair tied neatly at the back of his neck and a silver staff in one gloved hand. His voice crossed the water without effort. "Princess Elowen, by order of the Blood Regent, you will return with us." Caleb stopped at the ferry house door. "Princess." The word landed heavier than thunder. The girl, Elowen, did not look back at the boat. She looked at Caleb. "Do not open this door for them," she said, "no matter what they promise." Caleb shoved the door open and guided her inside. The old ferry house was small, cluttered, and embarrassingly human. All cracked floorboards, hanging tools, coffee tins, spare cables, and an oil heater coughing orange light into the room. Elowen stood in the center of it like a piece of moonlit royalty dropped into a mechanic's shed. Water pooled around her feet. Silver chains trailed behind her. Caleb locked the door, then dragged a cabinet in front of it. "How many are out there?" he asked. "Enough. That is not a number. Enough to make your town deny you were ever born." Caleb found the bolt cutters behind a stack of ferry parts and returned to her. Up close, he saw the faint marks where the silver cuffs had burned cold against her skin, but he forced himself not to stare. "Hold still." Elowen extended her wrists, and for the first time since the river, she looked uncertain. "If you break a royal restraint, the law will mark you as my rescuer." Caleb set the blades around the first cuff. "That sounds better than leaving you chained. You do not understand. In my mother's court, a rescuer is not a witness. He becomes part of the debt." Outside, something tapped once against the door. Not a knock, a polite warning. Caleb looked at the cuff, then at her crimson eyes, and closed the cutters with both hands. The lock split open with a sharp, clean crack, and every red lantern outside went dark. The moment the first cuff broke, the ferry house changed. It was not dramatic at first. No explosion of power, no storm of shadows, no screaming glass. It began with silence. The old oil heater stopped coughing. The rain on the roof softened until each drop sounded far away. Even the river beyond the walls seemed to hold its breath. Caleb still had the bolt cutters closed around the broken cuff when the royal crest on Elowen's cloak flickered with a thin crimson light. The black rose and crescent moon were not stitched thread. They were alive somehow, drawn from old magic and older blood, and now they were waking. Elowen pulled her hand back as if the light had startled her more than the men outside. "No," she whispered. "It should not answer here." Caleb looked from the broken cuff to her face. What should not answer? Before she could speak, the second cuff began to glow. The silver links around her other wrist tightened once, not enough to harm. but enough to remind both of them that the chain had been built to control someone far more dangerous than she appeared. Elowen closed her eyes, and the room grew colder. Frost crept across the inside of the windows in delicate white veins. The lantern flame narrowed to a blue thread. Caleb's breath came out in a pale cloud. He should have been terrified. A sensible man would have been. But he had spent his whole life fixing machines that failed at the worst possible moment. And the girl in front of him, princess or not, was still trapped in the last thing keeping her from freedom. He set the cutters around the second lock. Elowen's eyes opened. "Caleb Reed," she said, and the way she said his full name made him feel as if the walls themselves had repeated it. "If you break that one, my mother will know your face. Then she will know I had both hands full and no time to make a better choice. You think this is kindness?" Her voice trembled at the edge of command. In the Nocturne Dominion, kindness toward the royal blood is never private. It becomes history. It becomes debt. It becomes law. Outside, the polite tapping came again, this time against every wall at once. The men had surrounded the fairy house without a footstep. Caleb forced his hands steady. "Sounds like your laws need better hobbies." For the first time, Elowen almost smiled. It was gone in an instant, but it reached her eyes, and in that brief softness Caleb saw the wound beneath all that royalty. Not the marks from the silver, not the exhaustion from the river, but a deeper loneliness, the kind that came from being protected like treasure and used like a treaty. Then a voice slid under the door, smooth as polished stone. "Human mechanic, your compassion has been noted. Step aside, and you will be compensated." Caleb glanced at Elowen. Her face had gone still again, too still. "That is Regent Varric," she said quietly. "He speaks for the court when my mother is absent. And when your mother is not absent, then he kneels." The answer carried no pride, only fact. Caleb tightened his grip on the cutters. "Why did he chain you?" Elowen looked toward the door as if the wood had become transparent. "Because the court believes my mother has grown weak. They believe a queen who loves her daughter can be forced to surrender what a queen without love would defend." Caleb understood enough. Not all of it, maybe not even most of it, but enough to feel the shape of the trap. Elowen had not been dumped in the river to disappear. She had been placed there like bait, close enough to the human border to create a scandal, far enough from the palace to make rescue look impossible. And he, with his leaking boots and overdue rent, had walked right into the center of it. "Why warn me away?" he asked. "You could have let me break the cuffs and deal with the rest later." Elowen looked at his hands, raw from the cold silver, then back to his eyes. "Because humans who touch our wars usually vanish inside them." That should have ended the conversation. It should have made Caleb drop the tool, open the door, and let the night court take back its princess. Instead, he thought of the way she had tried to push herself between him and the fog, even while she was the one in chains. He closed the cutters. The second cuff cracked open. A pulse of crimson. Light shot through the fairy house, not destructive, not violent, but vast, like a bell ringing under the earth. Every window flashed red. The cabinet in front of the door slid backward an inch by itself. Outside, every hidden figure fell silent. Elowen gasped and caught Caleb's sleeve, not for balance, but to stop him from stepping away. The broken silver slipped from her wrist and struck the floor. Where it landed, frost bloomed into the shape of the same black rose. Then a voice Caleb had never heard filled the room, deep, feminine, regal, and terrifyingly calm, coming not from outside but from the crest glowing over Elowen's heart. "Who has broken my daughter's chains?" Elowen went pale in a way even a vampire should not. "Mother," she breathed. Caleb stared at the crest, suddenly aware that somewhere beyond the river, beyond the fog, beyond the dark towers of a kingdom he had never entered, the vampire queen had just turned her attention toward him. The voice came again, colder than the river and clearer than thunder. "Answer me." Caleb looked at Elowen. She did not command him now. She did not warn him. For the first time since he had pulled her from the water, she simply waited, as if the next words out of his mouth could decide both their futures. Caleb swallowed, lifted his chin, and said, "My name is Caleb Reed. She was chained in my river, so I helped her out." For 3 seconds, there was no sound at all. Then every bell in the town of Briar's Crossing began to ring at once. The bells did not sound like church bells. They rang from every rooftop, every dock post, every sealed treaty marker along the river. a deep iron chorus that made the floorboards tremble beneath Caleb's boots. Elowen's hand tightened around his sleeve, and for one brief heartbeat, she looked less like a princess and more like someone who had just heard the door of a cage open into a worse cage. Outside, the red lanterns flared back to life all at once. Regent Varric spoke again, but his polished calm had thinned. "Your Majesty, this human has interfered with a sovereign matter. Permit me to secure the princess and erase the misunderstanding." The glowing crest over Elowen's heart pulsed once, and the queen's voice filled the fairy house with quiet authority. "You will not enter." The command was so simple that Caleb almost missed the force behind it. The tapping stopped. The walls stopped creaking. Even the river seemed to pull away from the shore. Elowen exhaled as if she had been holding her breath for years. Then the queen said, "Daughter, are you standing freely?" Elowen looked down at her bare wrists. The broken cuffs lay open on the floor, useless now, their silver glow fading into dull gray. "Yes, mother." "Were you harmed by the human?" "No." A pause. "Did he demand reward?" Elowen looked at Caleb. Rainwater still dripped from his hair. His hands were red from the silver's cold burn, though he kept them half hidden at his sides. His workshop smelled of oil, wet wool, hot metal, and fear he was trying very hard not to show. "No," she said softly. "He demanded nothing." The crest brightened. When the queen spoke again, something in her tone changed, not warmer exactly, but sharper with meaning. "Then the old law has heard him." Elowen went still. Varric's voice cut in from beyond the door. "Your Majesty, I urge caution. The old law is ceremonial. No human mechanic can be recognized under the moon debt without court witness." Caleb had no idea what the moon debt was, but he understood Varric's panic. It was the same tone landlords used when a receipt proved them wrong. The same tone officials used when a poor man found a rule written in his favor. Elowen turned toward the door, her eyes hardening. "There was witness enough. You watched him pull me from the river." Silence answered her. Caleb moved to the small window beside the tool rack and wiped frost from the glass with his sleeve. Outside, Briar's Crossing had awakened in terror. Lights burned in upstairs rooms. Faces stared through curtains. On the river, the black boat waited motionless, its passengers standing like shadows wearing manners. At the center, Varric lowered his silver staff, and for the first time Caleb saw anger hiding behind the elegance. Elowen stepped beside him but kept a careful inch of space between them, as if she was afraid touching him again might make the law even stronger. "Listen to me," she said under her breath. "The moon debt is older than my mother's throne. If someone saves royal blood without bargain, without fear, and without command, the crown must answer the debt publicly." "Publicly meaning what?" Caleb asked. "Meaning you cannot be quietly threatened, paid off, or forgotten." "That sounds useful." "It also means you must be taken to the palace before sunrise." Caleb looked at her. "Taken as a prisoner?" Elowen did not answer quickly enough. The old fairy house suddenly felt smaller. The queen's voice returned, and this time it addressed him alone. "Caleb Reed of Briar's Crossing, you broke silver under my crest. You freed my daughter while my court watched and hesitated. By the law of the first night, you are under my protection until the debt is weighed." Caleb let out a slow breath. "Respectfully, Your Majesty, I have work orders due in the morning." Elowen looked at him as if he had just insulted a thunderstorm. The queen was silent for one dangerous second. Then, to Caleb's shock, she gave a low laugh, not kind, not cruel, but ancient and almost disbelieving. "A man surrounded by my enemies, standing beside my only child, and he worries about broken lanterns." Caleb glanced at the door. "Broken lanterns are how I pay rent." "Not tonight," the queen said. "Tonight, your name enters the palace record." Before Caleb could answer, Varric raised his staff outside and spoke loudly enough for the town to hear. "People of Briar's Crossing, remain inside. By Dominion authority, the human Caleb Reed is accused of unlawful interference with royal custody." Windows slammed shut across the street. The fear in the town became almost physical, pressing against the fairy house from every direction. Caleb felt it then, the cost of what he had done. Not just danger to himself, but danger to anyone who admitted knowing him. His landlord, the grocer who let him buy on credit, the widow whose porch lamp he had fixed last week. Varric was not only threatening him, he was isolating him. Elowen saw the realization cross his face. You can still step away, she whispered. Say I forced you. Say you did not. Understand. Caleb looked at the broken cuffs on the floor, then at the town hiding behind locked doors, then at the princess who had warned him even while she was drowning. His moral choice arrived without drama, without music, without time to dress it up as courage. He picked up the broken chain, opened the fairy house door, and stepped onto the rain-dark porch where every red lantern turned toward him. My name is Caleb Reed, he called across the river, his voice rough but steady. No one forced me. No one paid me. She asked me to walk away, and I chose not to. The black boat shifted in the current. Varric's expression tightened. Elowen appeared in the doorway behind Caleb, free of the cuffs, her crimson eyes reflecting the storm. Then the river mist split apart, and beyond the far bank, miles away but suddenly visible through the rain, a palace of black towers and crimson windows lit up against the night. One by one, every tower bell began to answer the bells of Briar's Crossing. The queen's voice rolled across the water for the entire town to hear. Then bring him to my palace unharmed. The human stands in the debt of my blood. The crossing into the nocturne dominion did not feel like traveling into another country. It felt like being swallowed by a verdict. Caleb sat in the narrow black boat with his hands wrapped in clean linen that Elowen had taken from a hidden compartment beneath the seat. The cloth was finer than anything he owned, pale as candle smoke, and it cooled the sting left by the silver chains without fully taking it away. Across from him, Regent Varric stood with one gloved hand resting on his staff, his posture flawless, his smile gone. Around them, the river fog parted without wind, opening a path toward the far bank where the trees leaned over the water like witnesses who regretted what they had seen. Briar's Crossing faded behind them, its windows dark again, its people sealed inside their fear. Caleb looked back only once. The fairy house sat small and crooked beneath the rain, the door still open, the oil heater still glowing inside like a stubborn orange heart. He had left with nothing but his coat, his wrench, and the impossible weight of a princess sitting beside him. Elowen had not spoken since they stepped onto the boat. She sat straight despite exhaustion, her wet cloak gathered around her shoulders, her crimson eyes fixed on the palace lights burning in the distance. Without the chains, she seemed less fragile and far more dangerous, not because she threatened anyone, but because the air remembered who she was before the river tried to erase her. Every vampire on the boat kept a careful distance from her. Even Varric did not look directly at her for long. Caleb noticed that, and filed it away with every other detail he did not understand. The far bank rose from the mist in black stone steps cut into the earth. At the top waited a procession of silent riders, horses draped in dark velvet, their bridles set with small red stones that glimmered like banked coals. No one offered Caleb a horse. Instead, a carriage stood open for him and Elowen, tall and narrow, carved from black wood with the royal crest set into both doors. Caleb paused at the first step. Is this where I am thanked or arrested? Varric's pale eyes shifted toward him. In the Dominion, those can resemble each other. Elowen turned sharply. He rides with me. The regent's expression smoothed at once. As the princess commands. Caleb should have felt reassured. He did not. He climbed into the carriage and sat opposite Elowen as the door closed, sealing them inside with the smell of rain, old velvet, and something faintly sweet beneath the cold. The carriage began moving before the driver touched the reins. For several minutes, only the wheels spoke, whispering over the road as the forest passed outside in streaks of silver bark and red lantern glow. Then Elowen reached across the space between them and gently took one of Caleb's bandaged hands. He tensed, not because he feared her, but because every law in her world seemed to turn ordinary gestures into traps. She noticed and released him immediately. I only wanted to see if the burns were spreading. They are burns. Silver does not burn humans the way it burns us, but royal restraints are made to punish anyone who interferes with them. Caleb flexed his fingers. Good to know after the interfering. Her mouth curved faintly, but the expression failed before it became a smile. I am sorry. That surprised him more than the carriage, the vampire escort, or the palace growing larger beyond the glass. For what? For being in your river. For letting you become part of this. For knowing what would happen and still being grateful you stayed. Caleb looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the battle she was having with herself. Princess Elowen of the Nocturne Dominion, daughter of a queen feared on both sides of the border, had been raised to treat debt like law, emotion like weakness, and rescue like politics. Yet her voice had softened around one simple truth. She was grateful. "You warned me," Caleb said. "More than once. You ignored me. I do that when people are chained." The carriage slowed as the forest opened into a valley. Caleb turned toward the window and forgot how to breathe. The palace was not merely on the mountain. It seemed to grow from it, black towers rising from cliffs above a lake as still as polished glass. Crimson windows burned across its face, thousands of them, each one watching. Bridges arched between spires. Banners moved though there was no wind. At the highest tower, a single white light glowed like a moon caught in a cage. Elowen followed his gaze. "The palace of the first night." Caleb swallowed. "Looks expensive to heat." This time the smile reached her eyes, and for one moment the carriage felt almost human. Then the gates opened. The sound rolled through the valley, not loud, but final. Hundreds of vampires stood inside the outer court in perfect rows, nobles in dark formal coats, soldiers in black armor, attendants in silver masks, all silent beneath the rain. As the carriage stopped, their attention moved as one from Elowen to Caleb. It was not hatred exactly. It was shock sharpened into judgment. A human mechanic in a patched coat had arrived beside the rescued princess, marked by royal debt, and the court did not know where to place him in the order of the world. Varric opened the carriage door. "Your audience awaits." Elowen stepped out first. The entire court bowed. Then Caleb stepped down after her, and no one moved. The insult was quiet enough to be denied and clear enough to freeze the air. Elowen's shoulders stiffened. Caleb could feel her anger before he saw it, a pressure that made the rain curve away from her. But before she could speak, the palace doors opened at the top of the steps. A woman stood there in a gown of white and black, tall, pale, and crowned with a ring of dark metal that seemed to drink the light. Her presence moved through the courtyard like winter entering a room. Every vampire fell to one knee at once, including Varric. Elowen bowed her head. Caleb, uncertain and unwilling to fake a custom he did not know, stayed standing. The queen's crimson eyes found him. No guard moved. No noble breathed. Then the vampire queen descended one step and said, "So this is the human who touched my daughter's chains." Caleb felt every stare in the courtyard turn sharper. He raised his bandaged hand slightly, only because they were doing a poor job of helping her. A ripple passed through the court, outrage or disbelief, maybe both. The queen studied him for a long moment, unreadable. Then her gaze dropped to the linen around his hands, and something colder than anger crossed her face when she saw the marks left by the restraints. She turned to Varric. "My daughter was bound with punitive silver." Varric bowed lower. "A necessary precaution during unlawful transport, Your Majesty." "Unlawful," the queen repeated softly. The word carried farther than thunder. Elowen stepped forward. "Mother, he saved me without bargain." The queen did not look away from Caleb. "And now the old law demands a consequence." The court held its breath. Caleb did too. The queen raised one hand, and the palace bells stopped ringing all at once. "Until the moon dead is weighed, Caleb Reed will remain inside my palace under my personal protection. No noble will threaten him. No soldier will touch him. No minister will question him without my presence." Her eyes moved across the court, and even the rain seemed to kneel. "And if any member of this court objects, they may explain why they preferred my daughter at the bottom of a river." Silence crashed over the courtyard. Then, from somewhere among the kneeling nobles, a woman's voice whispered just loud enough for everyone to hear. "If the debt is accepted, the human may claim a royal favor." Caleb looked at Elowen. Elowen looked at her mother. The queen's expression did not change, but the entire palace seemed to tighten around the possibility. Varric lifted his head, alarm flashing through his polished mask. "Your Majesty, surely you would not allow a border mechanic to hold claim over the blood crown." The queen turned back to Caleb, and for the first time, he understood the true size of what he had done. He had not just saved a princess. He had stepped into a law powerful enough to frighten the people who ruled the night. The queen approached until she stood close enough for him to see that her face was not cruel. It was tired in a way crowns were not supposed to be. "Tell me, Caleb Reed," she said quietly, while the entire court waited to hear whether he would become honored guest, political weapon, or something far more dangerous. What does a human who demands nothing do when the law offers him anything? Caleb's first thought was that any man with sense would ask for safe passage home, a cleared debt, and maybe enough money to fix every broken lantern in Briar's Crossing. His second thought was that every noble in the courtyard expected exactly that. They watched him with thin smiles and colder eyes, already placing him into the story they preferred. A poor human tempted by vampire gold, frightened by vampire power, useful for one night and forgettable by morning. The queen stood before him beneath the rain, waiting. Elowen stood 3 steps behind her, silent now, because whatever answer Caleb gave had to be his alone. Varric watched from one knee with the stillness of a man praying for someone else to make a mistake. Caleb looked past them all at the palace doors, at the rows of soldiers, at the silver-masked attendants, at the court that had bowed to the queen but refused even a nod to him. Then he remembered the river, Elowen's voice telling him to walk away, her body shaking from cold chains she had tried to pretend did not hurt, and the way. Everyone powerful had arrived only after she was already free. "I want the people who chained her named in public," Caleb said. The courtyard went so quiet that the rain seemed loud again. The queen's expression did not change, but her crimson eyes sharpened. "You understand that you may ask for land, protection, wealth, a title, or a treaty privilege. I understand I am probably underdressed for all of those." A few faces in the court tightened with offense. Caleb kept his gaze on the queen. "But if the law says I get one favor because I helped your daughter, then I want the truth said where everyone can hear it. Not whispered in a hall. Not buried in a record. Said out loud." Elowen lowered her eyes, and for the first time since the courtyard gates opened, she looked shaken in a way that had nothing to do with fear. The queen turned slowly toward her court. "You heard the human." Varric rose smoothly, his smile returning like a blade covered in silk. "A noble sentiment, your majesty, but dangerous. Public accusation without inquiry could fracture the council. The border towns are already unstable. Human involvement complicates the optics." Caleb glanced at him. "I fix machines for a living, and even I know when someone is trying to hide smoke by talking about the weather." A ripple moved through the nobles. Not laughter, not approval, but the startled sound of people unused to hearing a court minister spoken to like a faulty engine. Varric's pale eyes settled on Caleb. "You are in a palace whose customs you do not know." "That is true." Caleb lifted his bandaged hands. "But I know chains when I see them." The queen raised one finger, and the court fell silent again. "The moon debt has been invoked. The human's request is lawful." From the upper steps, an older noblewoman with silver hair and a collar of black pearls bowed stiffly. "Lawful, yes. Wise, no? Your Majesty, the rescuer is human. He has no standing among bloodhouses. To let him direct royal inquiry in open court invites humiliation." "Whose humiliation?" Elowen asked. Her voice was soft, but it moved through the courtyard like a door unlocking. Every eye shifted to her. She stepped forward, still, pale, still damp from the river, but no longer hidden behind exhaustion. "Mine, Lady Marrow? Because I was chained? Because I was carried through the water like a bargaining chip? Or because a human saw what my own court did not prevent?" Lady Marrow lowered her gaze. "Princess, I meant only to preserve the dignity of the crown." Elowen looked at the kneeling rows, the polished faces, the careful silence. "Then preserve it by telling the truth." Caleb felt the court turn against him more fully then, not in a rush, but in layers. He had become more than an inconvenient witness. He had given Elowen a place to stand that the court could not control. Somewhere above, behind the crimson windows, bells chimed once, and the palace doors opened wider. Servants in dark uniforms hurried down the steps with a long black cloak, which they placed over Elowen's shoulders without touching her skin. Another attendant approached Caleb with a formal coat trimmed in silver thread. Caleb took one look at it and shook his head. "No offense, but I will keep mine." The attendant froze. The queen's eyebrow lifted slightly. "Your coat is soaked." "It is also mine." Elowen turned her head, hiding another almost smile. The queen saw it. So did the court. That tiny softness did more damage than any argument. Murmurs broke out at once, controlled but sharp. Human stubbornness, royal familiarity, moon debt, improper influence. Border scandal. Caleb heard enough to understand the shape of the storm around him. They were not only angry that he had saved her. They were afraid she seemed less alone because he had. Varric seized the moment. Your Majesty, for the princess's safety, the human should be placed in guest confinement until the council convenes. Elowen's eyes flashed. He is not a prisoner. Of course not, Varric said. A protected guest with restricted movement. Caleb gave him a tired look. Back home we call that a prisoner with nicer furniture. This time someone in the back actually laughed before choking it silent. The queen's gaze moved across the court, landing on each face until the murmurs died. Caleb Reed will not be confined. Varric bowed. Then where shall he stay? Your Majesty. The question sounded harmless, but it landed like a trap. Nobles leaned forward almost imperceptibly. Elowen's fingers tightened around the edge of her cloak. Caleb realized there were rules here he still could not see. Invisible wires strung across every word. The queen looked at her daughter, then back at him. The old law is clear. Until the dead is weighed, the rescuer remains where royal blood can guarantee his safety. Varric went very still. Lady Marrow inhaled sharply. Elowen looked stunned. Caleb did not like being the last person in a room to understand anything. And where is that? He asked. The queen's voice carried across the courtyard, calm enough to be terrifying. In the east wing, beside Princess Elowen's chambers, under her protection and mine. The court erupted, not loudly, because no one dared, but the shock passed through them like wind through glass. Caleb felt heat rise under his rain-cold skin. Elowen turned toward her mother. That will be read as a claim. The queen did not deny it. Let them read carefully. Varric's polished mask finally cracked, just for a heartbeat. Caleb saw it. So did Elowen. The queen descended the last step until she stood beside her daughter and the human mechanic who had become a court crisis before breakfast. At moonrise, she announced, the council will gather. The human's request will be heard. The names behind my daughter's chains will be spoken, or this palace will learn why silence has become more precious than loyalty. Then she looked at Caleb, and her voice lowered so only he and Elowen could hear. You asked for truth in a house built to survive without it. Be careful, Caleb Reed. By tonight, half my court will want you gone, and the other half will want to use you. Caleb looked at Elowen. She looked back with a seriousness that made the whole palace seem to fade around them. And you? He asked quietly. Elowen held his gaze. I want to know why you stayed. Before he could answer, a silver-masked attendant hurried down the steps, bowed deeply, and held out a sealed black message to the queen. The queen broke it open, read one line, and the temperature in the courtyard dropped. Varric, she said, why does the Human Border Council already know my daughter was rescued before my own ministers reported it? Every face turned toward the regent. Varric's smile returned, but this time it did not reach his eyes. The queen did not ask her question twice. She did not need to. The courtyard had already become a courtroom, and every face inside it understood that the wrong answer could move a throne. Varric bowed with perfect grace, but the rain sliding down his silver staff trembled in tiny, uneven lines. Your Majesty, border councils trade rumors faster than ravens. A princess appears at the river. Bells ring. Human witnesses panic. It is hardly surprising that word traveled. The queen held the black message between two fingers. This message was sealed before the bells rang. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of calculations breaking apart. Caleb felt Elowen step closer, not behind him now, but beside him. He could feel the cold pressure of her anger like winter against his shoulder. Varric's smile remained, but his eyes moved once toward the upper windows of the palace, quick enough that most people would have missed it. Caleb did not. He had spent years watching customers lie about how a machine broke, and every liar looked somewhere when the truth got too close. The queen turned the message outward so the court could see the human council mark pressed into the black paper. The border council was told my daughter would be found in human hands before dawn. They were advised to prepare a formal accusation against the Dominion for staging a royal incident on neutral water. Elowen's voice cut through the ring. Someone meant to turn my rescue into a treaty crisis. Lady Marrow touched the pearls at her throat, or into proof that humans cannot be trusted near royal blood. Caleb looked at Varric. That is why your men waited on the far bank. Every head turned toward him. Varric's expression cooled. Be cautious, mechanic. Caleb lifted his bandaged hands. You did not rush to pull her out. You waited until I did it. Then you called me unlawful. The words landed harder because they were simple. Elowen turned slowly toward the regent. You knew where I was. Varric looked at her then, and for the first time, the softness of court manners vanished from his face. What remained was not rage. It was disappointment, as if she had failed to remain useful. I knew you would survive, he said. The court stirred in horror, but he raised his voice before anyone could interrupt. And I knew your mother would answer the old law if some sentimental border soul played hero. The Dominion is weakening because the Crown has mistaken affection for policy. For years we have bent to treaties, spared border towns, endured human insolence, and watched noble houses lose authority while your mother protects peace, as if peace ever protected us. The Queen's face became still in a way that made Caleb's pulse climb. Choose your next words with care. Varric spread his hands, elegant and fearless now that secrecy had ended. Gladly. The princess was never meant to die. She was meant to be recovered after the scandal began. A human rescuer would force the moon debt. The court would divide. The border council would accuse us. Your Majesty would look compromised, emotional, and unfit to judge between daughter and kingdom. Then the council would finally do what it should have done years ago. Elowen went pale, but she did not step back. You used me to wound my mother. I used a truth everyone here already knows, Varric said. The Queen loves you more than the crown. The words moved through the courtyard like a blade hidden in silk. The Queen did not deny them. That was the twist that changed everything. She looked at Elowen, and the ancient ruler, the feared monarch of the Nocturne Dominion, wore pain so controlled that it was almost invisible. Almost. Caleb saw it. So did Elowen. So did every noble who had spent years mistaking restraint for emptiness. Yes, the Queen said at last. I love my daughter. The confession struck the court harder than anger could have. Varric faltered, because he had expected shame, not ownership. The Queen descended the final step until she stood on the rain-dark stone among them all. And because I love her, I did not let this kingdom become a machine that eats its children and calls the sound tradition. Caleb felt Elowen's breath catch beside him. Varric's grip tightened on his staff. Beautiful words. Dangerous ones. The houses will not follow a crown that lets humans rewrite our laws. Caleb looked around at the nobles, the soldiers, the silent attendants, the hundreds waiting to see which way power would lean. Then he noticed the broken cuffs still in an attendant's tray near the carriage. The silver had gone dull, but the black rose frost mark remained on one half of the lock. An idea formed, not clever, not safe, but clear. You said the old law needed a court witness, Caleb said. Varric's eyes narrowed. What of it? Caleb walked to the tray before anyone could stop him and picked up the broken cuff. The cold bit through the linen, but he held it up for the court to see. Then witness this. I did not save her because she was royal. I did not know she was royal. I saved her because she was chained and scared and still trying to warn me away from danger. If your law only matters when the right kind of person is rescued by the right kind of person, then it is not law. It is decoration. A murmur rose, but this one was different. It moved among soldiers first, then attendants, then younger nobles who looked at Elowen as if seeing the river for the first time. Varric sensed the shift and raised his staff. Enough. The human manipulates sympathy. Elowen stepped in front of Caleb before the staff could point fully toward him. The whole courtyard froze. She did not touch Varric. She did not threaten him. She simply stood between the regent and the man who had pulled her from the water. No, she said. He reminds us what we buried. The Queen's eyes shone crimson, and the palace bells rang once, deep and final. From the highest tower, the white light flared open, revealing not a lamp but a great circular window. Behind it, shadows moved. Witnesses. Dozens of them. Caleb realized the council had been watching from above the entire time. Then a new voice, older than Varric's and colder than the rain, spoke from the tower. The council has heard enough. At moonrise, the regent will answer under oath, and the human will stand as first witness. Varric's face emptied. Elowen turned toward Caleb, and in her eyes he saw gratitude, fear, and something warmer that neither of them had the safety to name. But before anyone could move, Varric leaned close enough for only Caleb to hear. You think truth wins in palaces, he whispered. By moonrise, you will learn what palaces do to honest men. Moonrise turned the council hall into a room made of judgment. Caleb stood on a circle of black stone in the center, still wearing his soaked patched coat because no one had successfully convinced him to trade it for court silk. Above him, a ceiling of dark glass revealed the pale moon hanging over the palace like a watchful eye. Around the hall, noble houses occupied rising tiers carved from obsidian, their faces half lit by crimson lamps, their whispers soft enough to be polite and sharp enough to cut. Elowen stood to his left beneath the banner of the Black Rose, dressed now in a high-collared gown of white and deep red that made her look less rescued than returned. The queen sat on a throne at the far end, not distant, not relaxed, but still as winter before a storm. Varric stood opposite Caleb, immaculate in silver-trimmed black, every trace of panic washed from his face. He looked like a man who had spent the afternoon finding the safest lie and polishing it until it shone. The oldest counselor, Lord Astor, raised a crystal rod and struck it once against the floor. The sound traveled through Caleb's ribs. The moon debt hearing begins. Human witness, speak only what you know. Caleb looked at Elowen. She gave the smallest nod. Not permission. Trust. He faced the council. I know the princess was chained in the river. I know Varric and his men were already waiting nearby. I know they did not try to save her before I did. I know a message reached the Human Border Council before the bells rang. And I know that when I broke the cuffs, the queen answered like someone who had not been told her daughter was missing. Varric smiled faintly. A moving collection of impressions. But impressions are not proof. Caleb expected that. He had nothing that looked like palace evidence. No signed confession. No hidden document. Only what he had seen, what he had heard, and the broken silver that still made his palms ache under the bandages. Then Elowen stepped forward. I have proof. The hall shifted. Varric's smile did not vanish, but it stopped moving. Elowen lifted her wrist. Around it glimmered a thin crimson mark where the cuff had been, not a wound, but a circle of light beneath the skin. Royal restraints remember the command that sealed them. They remember the voice. A murmur rose through the tiers. Lady Marrow leaned forward. Princess, that right has not been used in generations. Because no one wanted chains to speak, Elowen said. Her voice did not shake. Caleb looked at her and understood what courage cost in a room full of people trained to call pain inconvenient. The queen's fingers tightened once on the arm of her throne, but she did not interrupt. Lord Astor raised the crystal rod again. The right is lawful. Proceed. Elowen held her wrist over the broken cuff resting on a black pedestal. Crimson light flowed from her mark into the silver, and the hall filled with a recorded echo, thin at first, then clear. Varric's voice emerged from the cuff. The princess must be found in human hands. Not harmed. Not dead. Found. The queen's heart will do the rest. The council hall erupted. Not with violence, not with chaos, but with the collapse of denial. Nobles stood. Soldiers turned toward Varric. Attendants in silver masks stepped back from him as if politeness itself had lost its duty. Varric did not run. He bowed his head once, then looked up at the queen. I did what your ancestors would have thanked me for. The queen rose. Every sound died. My ancestors buried children in politics and called it strength. I will not. Varric pointed toward Caleb, and now his elegance finally cracked. Because of him, a human with mud on his boots and no bloodline anyone can name? Caleb felt the insult land, but before he could answer, Elowen moved. She crossed the circle and stood beside him, not behind, not in front, beside. Because of what he chose when every titled person in this palace chose caution. Varric's eyes burned with humiliation. You. Shame your house. No, Elowen said. I reveal it. The queen descended from the throne, each step echoing across the moonlit floor. Regent Varric, by your own voice, you conspired to endanger royal blood, manipulate human treaty law, divide this court, and force the moon debt for political gain. Your office is removed. Your authority is ended. You will leave this palace under guard and answer before the border tribunal you tried to deceive. Varric stared at her as if the words belonged to a language he refused to learn. You would send a vampire lord to answer beside humans? I would send a traitor to hear truth in every language available. The queen looked to the soldiers. They moved at once, cleanly, without spectacle, without cruelty, surrounding Varric with the calm efficiency of people relieved to obey a command that finally made sense. As they led him away, He turned his head toward Caleb one last time. You think this ends with gratitude? It does not. The court will never accept you. Caleb held his gaze. I am not here to be accepted by people who needed a hearing to decide chains were wrong. For the first time that night, the silence after Caleb spoke did not feel hostile. It felt awake. Lord Astor stepped into the center with the crystal rod lowered. The charge is answered. The moon debt remains. The rescuer asked that the guilty be named. The guilty has been named. Yet the law requires the crown to offer balance. The queen turned to Caleb. Elowen went very still beside him. Around the hall, nobles leaned forward, hungry for the next scandal. Caleb knew what they feared he would ask for. Land, title, power, a permanent claim over the princess. Something they could resent and use. He looked at Elowen, at the faint mark around her wrist, at the court that had spent the whole night discussing her as symbol, leverage, blood, duty, anything but a person. Then he looked at the queen. I want the debt paid to her. The words confused the hall. Caleb continued before anyone could twist them. Make it law that royal blood cannot be restrained, moved, or used by any minister without the crown and the person themselves speaking in open court. Not behind sealed doors, not through tradition. Publicly, let the debt buy her freedom from being turned into someone else's argument. Elowen stared at him. The queen's face changed in the smallest possible way, but the whole room felt it. A mother hearing the one request no courtier had thought to make. Lord Astor bowed his head. Such a decree would limit council power. Good, Caleb said. The queen looked across the tiers of nobles. Does the council object? No one moved. No one dared, and perhaps, Caleb thought, some no longer wanted to. The queen raised her hand. Then by the moon debt and the crown of the first night, it is done. The black stone beneath Caleb's feet warmed for the first time since he entered the palace. The broken cuff on the pedestal cracked down the center and fell into harmless dust. Elowen's wrist mark faded until only clean pale skin remained. She drew a breath so quiet only Caleb seemed to hear it. The sound of someone discovering that freedom could arrive without a door slamming. Then the queen stepped close, her crimson eyes holding his with a power that no longer felt like threat alone. Caleb read, your request has changed my law, but it has not settled where you stand in my palace. Caleb glanced toward Elowen. Her eyes were bright, guarded, hopeful in a way that made his chest tighten. The queen followed his gaze and lowered her voice. My daughter asked me not to let you leave before she speaks with you freely, with no debt between you. The council hall seemed to vanish around him. Caleb looked at Elowen, and this time no law pushed them together. No chain, no court, no scandal. Only a choice waiting in the open. Then I will stay long enough to listen, he said. Elowen smiled, small and real, just as the palace bells rang again, not for alarm this time, but for the first royal decree in 1,000 years born from a human's mercy. The council hall remained silent long after the decree was spoken, as if the palace itself needed time to understand that something ancient had just changed without breaking. The dust of the broken cuff lay on the black pedestal, harmless now, no brighter than ash from a burned letter. Caleb looked at it and remembered the riverbank, the rain, the cold silver in his hands, and Elowen whispering for him to walk away. Everything that had happened since then, the bells, the carriage, the queen, the court, the hearing, had grown from that one stubborn moment when he decided a stranger in chains mattered more than his own safety. Lord Astor struck the crystal rod once, not to call for silence, but to seal it. The unlawful restraint of Princess Elowen is entered into record. Regent Varric is stripped of office and transferred to border tribunal custody. The moon debt has been paid according to witness law. The royal decree stands. Across the tiers, nobles lowered their eyes. Some did it out of duty, some out of fear. A few, Caleb noticed, did it with something close to shame. The queen turned toward the soldiers at the doors. Send word to Briar's Crossing before sunrise. Caleb Reed is not accused of any crime. Any merchant, landlord, officer, or council member who punishes his neighbors for his choice will answer to both courts. Caleb felt the last knot in his chest loosen. He had not realized how much of him was still standing back in that little town, worrying about the people who had locked their windows because they had no power to do anything else. Elowen heard the change in his breathing and looked at him, her face softer now that the court could no longer pretend she was only a symbol. The queen stepped down from the throne until she stood in the same black circle as Caleb and her daughter. The old law began as a protection, she said, her voice carrying to every corner. Long ago, when royal blood was rescued from the battlefield or from betrayal, the crown owed the rescuer a debt so public that no faction could erase them. But over centuries, we twisted the law into ceremony. Tonight, a human who did not know our titles honored it better than we did. The words moved through the hall like a verdict and a blessing at once. Caleb looked at the queen. Then the debt is finished? The debt is finished, she said. No chain, no claim, no hidden law binds you to this palace. The room changed again, more sharply this time. Nobles leaned forward. Soldiers listened. Elowen went completely still beside him. This was the part everyone had been waiting for, the clean ending that power understood. The human would be thanked, rewarded, and sent home before his existence became more inconvenient. The queen lifted one hand, and two attendants brought forward a small black case. Inside lay a deed sealed in red wax, a purse heavy enough to change a poor man's year, and a silver passage token shaped like the crescent moon. You may leave at dawn with full protection, the queen said. Your debts in Briar's Crossing will be paid. Your fairy house will be restored. The Border Council will recognize you as a protected witness of the crown. No one here will stop you. Caleb stared at the case. It was more than he had ever had, more than he had ever asked for, and for one tired, honest second, he wanted to take it and go back to a life where the strangest thing in his week was a broken engine belt. Then Elowen spoke, not to her mother, not to the council, but to him. Caleb read, before you choose, I will make my choice in front of them. She stepped into the center of the circle, and every lamp in the hall caught the crimson of her eyes. I am not a debt to be weighed. I am not a treaty tool. I am not a daughter to be hidden until the court finds me useful. This human saved me when leaving me would have been easier, safer, and wiser. He broke no law that deserved respect. He broke the thing that held me down. Murmurs rose, but Elowen lifted her chin, and the sound faded. If he leaves with my honor protecting his name. If he stays by my invitation. Not because of blood, not because of debt, not because a court can turn gratitude into ownership. She turned to Caleb, and the palace seemed to fall away from them. I choose you as my oath-bearer, if you choose to stand beside me. Not above me, not beneath me, beside me. The word struck the council harder than a crown title would have. Oath-bearer was not a husband forced by old law, not a servant, not a hostage, not a pet human kept for palace gossip. It was a public station older than the current houses, a person trusted to speak truth to royal blood when courts preferred silence. Caleb understood enough to know it carried weight. He also understood the cost. Elowen was choosing him in front of every person who wanted her manageable, distant, and alone. He looked at the passage token, then at the queen. If I stay, Briar's Crossing stays protected? Yes, the queen said. And I still get to refuse ridiculous coats? The queen's mouth curved almost imperceptibly. Within reason. Caleb looked at Elowen's outstretched hand. There was no mark glowing on her wrist now, no chain of light, no magic pushing his fingers toward hers. Only a choice. His final choice. He took the passage token from the case and placed it back in the queen's palm. Then he turned and put his bandaged hand in Elowen's. I will stay long enough to learn the job, he said, and long enough to make sure nobody else ends up in that river because a palace called it strategy. For a breath, no one moved. Then the queen bowed her head to him. Not deeply, not as a subject, but enough for the entire hall to see the crown acknowledge the mechanic. One by one, the soldiers lowered their ceremonial blades until the points touched the black floor. The attendants bowed. Lady Marrow lowered her eyes. Lord Astor struck the crystal rod again, and the sound rang clear beneath the moon. Caleb Reed is recognized as oath-bearer to Princess Elowen of the Nocturne Dominion, protected by crown, witnessed by council, and honored under the first law. Outside the tall doors, the palace bells began to ring, not in alarm, but in recognition. By dawn, Briar's Crossing would hear them across the river and know the human who had pulled a chained girl from the water had not vanished into vampire politics. He had changed them. As the first pale line of sunrise touched the highest windows, Elowen led Caleb out onto the eastern balcony above the courtyard. Hundreds of vampires stood below, silent beneath the fading moon. This time, when Caleb appeared beside her in his patched coat and linen-wrapped hands, the court did not remain standing. The soldiers lowered their blades. The nobles bowed. The palace accepted what the river had begun. Elowen squeezed his hand once, not as a claim, but as a promise, and Caleb watched the sun rise over the border he had crossed by mercy. Far below, the river shone silver, no longer a trap, but a road between two worlds that would never be the same.